Dissolving Illusions. This video is based on key insights from the book Dissolving Illusions by Suzanne Humphries. Chapter 1: The Not-So-Good Old Days. In the early 1800s, life was far from idyllic as many envision it. Suzanne Humphries explains that this period was marked by harsh realities for the working class. People worked grueling hours in factories with no health or safety regulations. Children were also forced into arduous labor, often in dangerous conditions. Imagine walking along the banks of a sewer during the day. Under the bright sunlight, it appears as dark as strong green tea and as solid as black marble in shadows. This murky substance was the only source of drinking water for the destitute residents. As you watch, privies pour waste directly into this water, and filth from buckets splashes in. Such were the conditions documented by Henry Mayhew in 1849. Friedrich Engel's accounts from 1844 paint a grim picture of overcrowded, one-room homes with no internal floors. Outside, piles of waste and refuse covered the ground. These dwellings were so packed that disease spread easily. The population boom in cities during this era led to severe housing shortages. People crammed into tiny spaces, often sharing buildings once used for breweries or sugar refineries. Such living conditions fueled the spread of diseases and high death rates. Without proper waste management systems, human and animal waste accumulated in streets. This pollution entered local waterways, contaminating them, the sole source of drinking water for many city dwellers. Despite advancements by the early 1900s, poor sanitation persisted. Many families shared tiny rooms with no natural light or ventilation in crowded tenements. Lack of health regulations and zoning rules allowed businesses to operate near living quarters. This haphazard urban planning exposed the working class to harmful environments filled with smoke from factories, putrid garbage, and overflowing cesspools. In London, for instance, tens of thousands lived in damp, dark cellars infested with vermin by 1850. About a fifth of London's population resided in these grim underground chambers, reminiscent of the Middle Passage, slave ships' horrors. Poor planning compounded these issues. Overcrowded neighborhoods lacked open spaces or proper sewage systems. The result? Disease-breeding filth filled courtyards and alleys, creating a health crisis. A report by Arthur Cole in 1934 highlighted the plight of New York and Boston residents in the 1850s. Living conditions were so dire that entire communities existed underground, sheltering families amid vermin-infested, unsanitary environments almost like fever nests. Even with improvements by the early 1900s, millions still faced desperate circumstances. In New York and Boston, families squeezed into cramped, dark cellars teeming with pests. The absence of clean water, adequate sewage systems, and fresh air worsened their plight. Human and animal waste flowed unchecked into streets, contaminating nearby rivers used for drinking water. Despite improvements, cesspools continued to overflow and seep into these vital water sources by the mid-1800s. Industries exacerbated this mess by releasing their waste into air and water without regard for regulations. In 1850s London, factory smoke turned day into night, covering everything in grime. Rotting animal carcasses added to the repulsive cityscape. Lack of sanitation, laws meant garbage-littered streets. Scavenging pigs, dogs, and rats thrived amid this filth, further spreading diseases. By 1916, New York and Boston faced rat infestations, causing extensive damage estimated at $72 million and $91.25 million annually, respectively. Hospitals were often no better, overcrowded and unsanitary. They were seen as places where the sick and poor went to die. Bellevue Hospital in New York, for example, saw babies eaten by rats, sparking public outcry about the institution's hygiene standards. Food quality further contributed to widespread illness. Diseased or contaminated food, often sold cheaply to the working class, weakened immune systems and left people vulnerable to sickness. In Chicago and New York, poor milk quality alone caused thousands of child deaths annually. Suzanne Humphries underscores that these harsh conditions significantly impacted public health. Without proper medical interventions or vaccines, diseases raged unchecked among densely populated, unsanitary cities. This forgotten history reveals how drastically living standards improved in the 1800s and 1900s, paving the way for better health outcomes today. Chapter 2: Suffer the Little Children. In the 1800s and early 1900s, life for many children in the United States and England was far from idyllic. Their days were filled with grueling labor rather than play, and their living conditions were often harsh. Suzanne Humphries sheds light on this forgotten history. Children as young as 4 were forced to work in factories and mines. In cotton spinning mills, kids aged 7 and up worked in poorly ventilated spaces heated to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. This intense labor caused a variety of health issues including stunted growth, diseases like typhus, and severe eye problems. Ellison Jack, an 11-year-old girl in the 1840s, shared her harrowing experience as a coal bearer. She would descend into a pit, carry heavy loads of coal on her back, and climb steep ladders to fill tubs, a task that wore her out. Such hard labor left many children weak and diseased. Mining work was equally harsh. Girls as young as 6 would carry heavy loads up steep ladders to the surface, while boys might spend entire days waiting by mine gates, opening and closing them for coal sleds known as corves. These jobs often lasted 12-14 hours a day. The long hours and physically demanding tasks led to numerous accidents and fatalities. Children could be crushed by falling slate or machinery, kicked by mules, or even suffocated in coal streams. In the glass manufacturing industry, kids faced similar trials. Working near blistering furnaces, they developed rheumatic and bronchial diseases. A staggering 175 out of 176 boys working in one Indiana factory were confirmed drinkers by the age of 20, a direct result of the brutal conditions. As we delve deeper into this period, it's clear that poor health wasn't confined to working children alone. The stressful conditions also affected their mothers and siblings. Many women had to work long hours in factories, leaving young children to fend for themselves. This lack of proper care often resulted in severe neglect, contributing to high infant mortality rates. Suzanne Humphries emphasizes that these kids were not just working, they were battling diseases we now have vaccines for. Yet, amidst such harsh conditions and poor nutrition, they had no chance to build strong immune systems. Measles, whooping cough, and other illnesses ravaged communities, often leading to death. It's a grim picture of childhood in the past, marred by disease, arduous labor, and insufficient health care. Understanding this history underscores how far we've come and reminds us that despite modern comforts, child labor and poverty continue to plague parts of the world today. Chapter 3: Disease, a Way of Life. In the 1800s, diseases were a common part of life. People suffered from various illnesses due to poor living conditions and sanitation. Suzanne Humphries explains how extreme poverty, filth, and overcrowding in cities led to widespread disease epidemics. One major issue was lack of clean water. In places like Chicago, sewage and waste from slaughterhouses contaminated drinking water, causing diseases like typhoid fever. This illness, caused by bacteria in food or water, resulted in high fevers, severe stomach pain, diarrhea, and sometimes death. Thousands of Americans died from it each year in the late 1800s to early 1900s. Cholera, another disease of poor sanitation, infected millions in India between 1817 and 1860. It's a bacterial infection causing watery diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, and sometimes death from cramps. 6 cholera pandemics occurred throughout the century, affecting places like Russia, Ireland, North America, Italy, and Europe. The first pandemic started in 1816, and the last ended in 1926. Dysentery, an inflammation of the intestine from bacteria or an amoeba, was common too. It leads to severe diarrhea with blood and mucus in stools, often due to contaminated food or water, especially in crowded, unsanitary conditions. During the U.S. Civil War, dysentery took nearly half of soldiers' lives, second only to typhoid fever as a cause of death from disease. Typhus fever, spread by body lice, was also rampant. It's caused by a bacterium and thrives in dirty environments with poor hygiene. Typhus killed thousands during World War I, with Russia alone suffering up to 3 million deaths between 1917 and 1921. Diphtheria, an upper respiratory illness triggered by a toxin-producing virus within bacteria, caused severe throat infections leading to breathing difficulty. Undernourished people suffered greatly from diphtheria. In Germany between 1882 and 1891, it killed 111,021 out of 10 million urban residents, accounting for 1 in every 23 London deaths during that time. Scarlet fever, caused by Streptococcus pyogenes bacteria and marked by a red rash, led to complications like heart and kidney problems. In England and Wales from 1847 to 1861, scarlet fever and diphtheria together resulted in 262,429 deaths. Measles, a viral illness with high fever and skin rash, also caused many deaths, especially among children under 5 years old. Historically, doctors struggled to treat these diseases effectively. Puerperal fever, or childbed fever, was a deadly infection affecting mothers post-delivery due to unhygienic medical practices. Doctors often carried bacteria from dissecting corpses into the maternity ward without washing their hands. This led to severe infections, abscesses, sepsis, and high fever before death. Suzanne Humphries highlights how these diseases impacted society. Millions of motherless children were left behind due to high maternal mortality rates from preventable causes like puerperal fever. This tragedy influenced life expectancy statistics and societal norms, yet is often overlooked in discussions about the history of infectious diseases and vaccines. Humphries argues that focusing solely on vaccines oversimplifies this history. Non-vaccine factors such as improved living conditions, better nutrition, and enhanced obstetric care significantly reduced disease death rates in the past. By understanding this forgotten history, we can make more informed decisions about public health today, especially in developing countries facing similar challenges. Chapter 4: Smallpox and the First Vaccine. In the early days, smallpox was a dreaded disease. It caused painful pox marks all over the body and sometimes even led to death. This illness thrived in crowded areas, as seen in one instance where 6 children shared a single room with their parents, brother, and uncle. Smallpox ravaged families, often killing multiple members in close quarters due to lack of resources for burials. The first attempt to prevent smallpox was variolation, a practice brought from the Ottoman Empire by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. This involved taking material from a smallpox sore and scratching it into someone else's skin, hoping they'd get a mild case of smallpox but become immune. However, this method wasn't perfect. It could kill and also spread disease in the community. Despite these issues, variolation gained popularity until it fell out of favor due to its risks and the fact that it didn't always work. It was during this time that a rumor started among milkmaids getting cowpox might protect against smallpox. This idea led Benjamin Jesty, a farmer, to try it out on his wife and sons in 1774. Later, in 1796, Edward Jenner took this rumor seriously and conducted an experiment using cowpox material to vaccinate an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. When James was later exposed to smallpox, he didn't get the disease, suggesting that cowpox could protect from smallpox. Jenner's discovery, now known as vaccination, relied on a single test and lacked solid scientific methods. Yet it gained widespread acceptance despite contradictory evidence. For example, Dr. Drake's experiment in 1799 showed that children who were vaccinated still got smallpox. Similarly, Dr. Woodville's experience in 1798 revealed that cowpox could sometimes be a severe disease. Despite such findings, many doctors and the public continued to believe in Jenner's method. By 1801, around 100,000 people in England had been vaccinated. However, numerous accounts detailed cases where vaccination failed to protect against smallpox, including instances where vaccinated individuals died from the disease. As time went on, the medical community tried to justify vaccination by saying it caused milder disease rather than preventing it entirely. Yet, even this claim was questionable. During the 1844 epidemic, about one-third of the vaccinated people developed a mild form of smallpox, and roughly 8% still died. Despite these issues, laws were passed to enforce vaccination in many places, including England in 1853 and Massachusetts in 1855. These strict laws, however, didn't stop smallpox outbreaks. Boston saw periodic epidemics from around 1837, with particularly severe ones in 1850, 91860, 1860, 41865, and 1867. The worst was the 1870 21873 epidemic, which claimed over 1,000 lives. Similar patterns were seen worldwide. Even in heavily vaccinated populations like Prussia, Bavaria, Japan, and Italy, smallpox still caused severe outbreaks. In fact, during the 1871-873 epidemic in Prussia, over 60,000 people died despite their strict adherence to vaccination. Vaccination also had its own health risks. From 1859 to 1922, over 1,600 deaths in England were linked to the procedure, often due to a serious bacterial disease called erysipelas. There were even cases of tuberculosis and syphilis being spread through vaccination. By the early 1900s, smallpox deaths dwindled in England, mirroring a drop in scarlet fever, another bacterial disease without any clear link to vaccination. Vaccination rates dropped after 1872, but didn't prevent the near disappearance of smallpox by the late 1900s. In essence, the history of smallpox and vaccination is filled with attempts, successes, failures, and controversies. Despite initial hopes, vaccination wasn't the miracle cure everyone believed it to be. It had its own risks and limitations, yet it played a role in shaping public health policies and medical practices for centuries to come. Chapter 5: Contaminated Vaccines. In the world of vaccines, Suzanne Humphries uncovers some startling facts about contaminated ones, particularly focusing on smallpox vaccines. Even though these vaccines were marketed as pure lymph, they contained a mix of thousands to millions of microbes per cubic centimeter. Back when vaccine production began in the late 1700s, there was no such thing as refrigeration for cold storage or awareness about sterility. Vaccines were prepared and stored without much care, often leading to contamination. Needles were reused from one person to another, and vaccine materials were held in containers that weren't sealed properly. This meant germs could easily get into the mix, turning the pure vaccine into a germ-filled concoction. Smallpox vaccines were especially problematic because they used cowpox lymph from calves to create the smallpox vaccine. However, this process wasn't clean or controlled, leading to unwanted guests like foot-and-mouth disease virus getting into the mix. Foot-and-mouth disease is a nasty illness affecting cloven-hoofed animals such as cows, pigs, and sheep. It causes blisters on their mouths and feet, making them quite uncomfortable and even leading to death in severe cases. This disease was a significant worry for farmers because it could spread quickly, causing massive financial losses and trade restrictions due to its highly contagious nature. In 1902, the United States faced an outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease that started during vaccine production. The source turned out to be imported cowpox vaccine virus, tainted with foot-and-mouth disease virus from Japan. This contamination caused suffering in animals and led to the slaughter of thousands of them, along with strict measures taken to control the spread of the disease. Interestingly, similar issues occurred in 1908 due to another contaminated Japanese vaccine strain, which was also used for smallpox production. This time, the outbreak started at a farm near Detroit, where calves were kept specifically for making vaccine virus. The diseased animals were later returned to their original herds before being slaughtered. These events highlight how carelessly prepared and contaminated vaccines could result in serious health problems, not just for animals, but potentially for humans as well. In fact, Dr. James Howe reported 10 cases of a severe skin condition, bullous dermatitis, among recently vaccinated individuals during the 1902 outbreak, with 6 fatalities. Dr. Bowen also shared similar accounts, connecting these cases to animal handling professions like butchers and tanners who were more likely exposed to infected animals. It seems that contaminated vaccines could transmit diseases like foot-and-mouth disease to humans through the injection process. Sadly, it took time for medical communities to realize this connection. Even though vaccine-related issues had been reported, attributing specific outbreaks directly to tainted vaccines wasn't immediately recognized or acknowledged. The potential dangers of contaminated vaccines remain an important aspect of history that's often overlooked. In present times, despite advancements in detection methods, the risk of undetected contamination still exists within vaccines produced using animal cells or tissues. As long as animals play a role in vaccine manufacturing, there's always a possibility for unwanted guests to join the mix, leading to unknown consequences. Chapter 6: The Great Demonstration. In the mid-1800s, England saw a significant shift in its approach to disease control, particularly with smallpox. Vaccination, introduced in 1800, became compulsory by the 1853 law. This meant every child had to be vaccinated within 3 months of birth. If parents refused, they could face fines or imprisonment. The British government's push for high vaccination rates didn't prevent severe smallpox epidemics in the 1870s. Despite high vaccination numbers, Leicester, England, experienced thousands of smallpox cases and hundreds of deaths. This made many question the effectiveness of vaccination, leading to a growing skepticism about its protective powers. Many families had personal experiences with negative consequences from vaccination. Children suffered serious health issues, and some even died after being vaccinated. With no understanding of sterilization back then, arm-to-arm vaccination methods led to more complications. This caused parents to view forced vaccination as a violation of their liberty. The poor were particularly affected by the law's penalties. Unable to pay fines, they faced having their belongings seized and sold at public auction. One woman, Mrs. Arthur Ward, suffered a miscarriage due to fear and stress from vaccination officers attempting to enforce the fine. In 1885, amidst growing opposition, thousands gathered in Leicester to protest against the compulsory vaccination law. The demonstration, involving people from various professions across England and beyond, showcased a wide array of banners with slogans like "Liberty is our birthright" and "Liberty we demand." Effigies of vaccine pioneer Edward Jenner were hanged, and parliamentary acts were burned. Prominent participants included individuals who had been imprisoned for refusing vaccination and those whose property was seized. The crowd marched for about 2 hours, stopping at key points to receive cheers from supportive townspeople. At the end of the procession, some attendees handed themselves over to the police, willing to be jailed rather than vaccinate their children. The demonstration's organizer, Mr. Councillor Butcher, praised the crowd for maintaining exemplary conduct and using fair means to repeal the acts. He argued that better sanitation, hygiene, and clean streets could prevent diseases more effectively than vaccination. Many agreed, believing they should have the freedom to choose their health care without government interference. Following the demonstration, a meeting at Temperance Hall passed a resolution denouncing compulsory vaccination laws as unjust and destructive to personal liberty and parental rights. The event marked a significant moment in medical history, with residents of Leicester successfully challenging prevailing vaccine beliefs and government policies. As a result, vaccination rates plummeted from 95% to just 5%. Instead of relying on vaccines, Leicester leaders focused on improved sanitation, hygiene, and isolation methods to control smallpox and other diseases. Their unwavering commitment to self-determination and freedom of choice ultimately proved the medical community's warnings about widespread disease in an unvaccinated population false. Chapter 7: The Rebel Experiment. In the late 1800s, a significant debate erupted over smallpox prevention, vaccination or sanitation methods, as exemplified by Leicester's rebel experiment. Critics like Dr. Dreut and Dr. Hodge scorned vaccination, claiming it was pointless against a looming epidemic. They argued that jabbing healthy children with uncertain disease products was absurd. Meanwhile, Albert Einstein humorously noted how complex issues could become simpler when approached bravely and intelligently. The Leicester method, focusing on quarantine and thorough disinfection of smallpox patients' homes, gained traction amidst public backlash against compulsory vaccination. This led to dropped fines, imprisonments, and eventually plummeting vaccination rates, down to 10% by 1887. Leicester's unvaccinated population seemed impervious to smallpox, leading some medical experts to predict disaster once immunity wore off. However, their prophecies never materialized. Meanwhile, well-vaccinated areas like Mold and Flintshire suffered far worse during the 1893 outbreak, with death rates 32 times higher than Leicester's. Despite initial resistance from vaccine advocates, evidence mounted that unvaccinated people weren't at greater risk of contracting smallpox in epidemics. Dr. C. Killick Millard, Leicester's Minister of Health, shifted from vaccine faith to skepticism after witnessing Leicester's success. He concluded that vaccination was not the harmless act it seemed and didn't stop disease spread, as both mild and severe forms were contagious. By 1904, Dr. Millard refuted claims of unvaccinated individuals spreading smallpox and noted that children generally caught it from vaccinated adults. Even after 30 years, naysayers warned of impending doom for Leicester's unprotected fools. Yet the town remained smallpox-free, with only 5 deaths between 1892 and 1946. In 1910, Dr. Millard affirmed that infant vaccination-limited smallpox spread less than anticipated, and unvaccinated people weren't community threats. This debunked the rationale for compulsory vaccination. Finally, in 1948, England scrapped mandatory vaccinations. Leicester's 60-year experiment triumphed, showing sanitation methods could curb smallpox better than vaccines. Despite this, vaccine enthusiasm persisted globally, with smallpox eventually eradicated through surveillance and containment, not mass vaccination. This success story highlights how deeply ingrained beliefs can lead medical experts astray, emphasizing the importance of reevaluating established ideas in healthcare. Chapter 8: The Power of the State. In the mid-1800s, as smallpox persisted, governments and courts grew firm in their support for vaccination. Despite individual beliefs that vaccines caused harm or death, and despite opposing medical opinions, laws were passed to enforce vaccinations. For example, in 1869, England saw Mrs. Anne Sipple locked up for 7 days due to refusing a vaccine, while her infant daughter was given only bread and water. Similarly, in Atlanta in 1897, a dressmaker named L. Miller was fined $25.75, equivalent to about $680 today, or faced 25 days in prison for not getting vaccinated. When she couldn't pay the fine, she reluctantly agreed to be vaccinated and was released. In Boston in 1902, amidst a semi-epidemic of smallpox, health officials began compulsory vaccinations. Those who refused faced court appearances. In Asheville, North Carolina, Professor A.T. Weaver was jailed for refusing to be vaccinated and also for not paying a $25 fine. He hinted at possible legal action against the authorities, even considering taking his case before the state's Supreme Court. Vaccine enforcement often involved heavy-handed tactics. In Passaic, New Jersey, in 1901, about 200 tobacco factory workers rebelled when told they had to be vaccinated. Police intervened, and some women were forcibly vaccinated while screaming, struggling, and kicking. In Lead, South Dakota, A similar situation unfolded when minors resisted forced vaccinations, leading to fights and eventual compliance after police and sheriff intervention. Montreal's French Canadians also rioted in 1885 over compulsory vaccination, smashing windows of the health office and setting it on fire. The police eventually drove them out of the city limits after a skirmish where several officers were injured. Even judges supported these coercive measures. In Philadelphia in 1901, Judge Arnold denied an injunction against vaccination, asserting that teachers served their board of education like servants and had no right to resist. When school-age children were made mandatory for education, parents who kept kids home due to vaccine objections faced fines and imprisonment. For instance, in Darby, Connecticut, John McGigan was fined for keeping his 2 unvaccinated children at home after a school rule banned non-vaccinated students. In 1902, Health Commissioner George Mitchells of Passaic was arrested for refusing to let his daughter be vaccinated due to previous negative experiences with the vaccine in his family. Despite such objections, the state pursued its course. Eugenics, a belief in improving society by controlling genetic composition, played into this narrative. Eugenicists argued that forced sterilization of undesirables was similar to compulsory vaccination. Both were justified for the greater good. In 1928, Dr. Shorn H. Babington suggested sterilizing mental defectives, as they posed a threat to race betterment. Similarly, in 1910, C.B. Davenport of the Carnegie Institution advocated for preventing imbeciles from reproducing. The U.S. Supreme Court supported these views in the landmark 1927 case Buck v. Bell. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., writing for the majority, compared forced sterilization to compulsory vaccination, claiming both were non-punitive and aimed at protecting society from harm. This led to thousands of forced sterilizations in the U.S., mostly in California. By 1937, over 25,000 operations had been performed for eugenic reasons. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, initially supported birth control for racial betterment, but later emphasized personal reproductive choice. However, immigrants often faced scrutiny based on perceived mental defects, influenced by eugenics-driven prejudices. The Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 reflected these views, limiting immigration to preserve the purity of the American race. Eugenicists like Harry Laughlin championed such policies, believing in the constitutionality of eugenics-based sterilization as long as due process was followed. Even after Nazi atrocities revealed the dark side of eugenics, its influence lingered. Compulsory vaccination ended in England only in 1948, post-World War II, and similar practices faded from other governments over time. Yet the lesson remains clear. Understanding history can prevent repeating past mistakes. The current trend of states and workplaces increasingly controlling vaccine choices echoes this forgotten past, serving as a reminder to stay vigilant against loss of personal freedoms. Chapter 9: The Case of Arthur Smith, Jr. In the year 1914, young Arthur Smith, Jr., an 11-year-old boy living in New Windsor, New York, found himself at the center of a controversy surrounding vaccines and compulsory immunization laws. Suzanne Humphries tells us his story in her book. Arthur lived with his parents, Arthur Smith and Hilda, alongside his 2 sisters, Annie and Jenny. He was a typical kid, not the top of his class, but doing well nonetheless. However, at the start of the fall school term, things took a turn due to a state law. Dr. Finnegan from the State Department of Education sent out letters instructing schools to enforce this compulsory vaccination rule. The letter warned that any unvaccinated child would be barred from attending school, leading ultimately to their parents' arrest and imprisonment. The Smith family, like many others in New Windsor, was intimidated by this threat. Despite their initial reluctance, they eventually consented to have Arthur and his sisters vaccinated under the pressure. The vaccinations seemed to affect them differently. Annie and Jenny only experienced minor discomforts, but recovered swiftly. Sadly, Arthur's situation took a turn for the worse. Within a week post-vaccination, Arthur started showing severe symptoms. His limbs swelled up twice their size, and his body was covered in blisters that later oozed pus. His parents feared he was dying, as his once healthy body turned into a scene of constant agony. The sores were so bad that Arthur could no longer attend school or play with other kids. Instead, he had to spend his days near the fireplace, wrapped in bandages and suffering excruciating pain, all because of the vaccine. In New Windsor, only the principal read Dr. Finnegan's letter to the children, without taking further action against unvaccinated students. This was common across various schools in New York, as many boards of education chose to ignore the state's demand for compulsory vaccination law enforcement. As Arthur battled this unknown disease, his parents wished they could fight back against the mandatory vaccination order. Many in town were enraged by what happened to him. One person even claimed that Arthur's suffering was worse than the torments of the damned. A prominent educator from New Windsor went so far as saying, "If Smith's boy dies, he will be murdered by Dr. Finnegan, purely to appease a group of medical fanatics." Arthur received care from multiple doctors, but treatments were unsuccessful. Eventually, in May 1915, his father took him to Albany to see Dr. Curtis, a blood specialist. After examining Arthur, Dr. Curtis diagnosed him with pemphigus, a rare condition from which he'd barely survive. Coincidentally, recent investigations revealed that vaccines were contaminated with foot-and-mouth disease at the time. Finally, after 3 long years, Arthur showed signs of recovery by December 1918. He described his current health as fairly good, though his skin was marked with brown spots from previous eruptions, a reminder of the ordeal he endured. Unfortunately, Arthur's experience wasn't unique. Other children in New Windsor suffered similar fates due to compulsory vaccination. For instance, Michael Rawson's daughter also developed sores, blisters, and boils after vaccination, affecting her mental health permanently. Mary McCurry, another student, contracted St. Vitus dance, a neurological disorder causing uncontrollable movements, shortly after getting vaccinated. Her once bright future was marred by constant muscle twitches and inability to control her limbs. Interestingly, Mary's brother Thomas had suffered a severe reaction to vaccination years before. He developed sores all over his body, leading him to miss school completely. Later, he experienced blindness, paralysis, and twisted spine, leaving him helpless and unable to speak intelligibly. Despite these harrowing experiences, officials continued their staunch support of mandatory vaccination. Reports of adverse reactions faded from collective memory, leaving behind a myth about the supposed safety and effectiveness of vaccines, a narrative that persists to this day. Chapter 10: The Health Revolution. In the mid-1800s, cities in the Western world were filled with slums. These areas, like those in New York City, were crowded and dirty. People lived without private toilets, dust bins, drains, or running water. The smell from open sewers was terrible, and diseases such as cholera, typhoid, scarlet fever, smallpox, and typhus spread quickly. However, a revolution in health began to take shape. People started realizing that cleanliness could prevent many illnesses. Before this, it was thought that diseases came from mysterious gases called miasma. A group of unlikely heroes social activists, prison reformers, doctors, clergy, and scientists teamed up to push for changes in sanitation. They argued that diseases and poverty were often results of unclean living conditions, not just causes of poverty itself. Thanks to their efforts, governments started setting health standards. They worked on providing clean water and removing waste from homes and streets. In England, laws were passed in the 1850s and 1860s to create public health authorities with power over sewage collection, water supply, environmental issues, and even medical licensing and child labor rules. John Snow, an English doctor, made a crucial discovery in 1854. He found that the source of a cholera epidemic in London was contaminated water from a specific pump. After proving this with evidence, he convinced the city council to shut down the polluted water supply. The epidemic soon stopped, showing that diseases could come from unclean water. These health improvements were not always welcome. Wealthy people who benefited from the slums often resisted changes. For instance, in New York City, slum owners used their influence to secure health officer positions in the city's health department, preventing proper sanitation enforcement. Despite resistance, progress was made. In London, a massive sewage system was built between 1859 and 1865 under the guidance of Chief Engineer Joseph Bazalgette. By 1875, this ambitious project was finished, significantly improving the city's hygiene. Chlorination of water in the late 1800s further protected against diseases like cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. This process, introduced in America in 1908 and widely adopted by 1913, proved better than traditional water filtration methods. As clean water became more accessible through piping systems, homes got water closets for proper waste disposal. This ended the practice of throwing human waste into streets, which previously contaminated drinking water. In the 1850s, wastewater was discharged into open ditches. By 1904, there were 1506 properties with flush toilets connected to sewers. In 1909, a second sewer plan was launched, and the first wastewater treatment plant was built. Public opinion and health officials recognized that cleanliness was essential for preventing diseases even before the germ theory was widely accepted. They pushed for improved hygiene standards, battling against beliefs that frequent use of soap harmed skin. By the early 1900s, many still believed that dirt produced harmful gases causing illness. This idea gradually faded away as science advanced our understanding of germs and diseases. Improved nutrition and sanitation also played a significant role in public health during this period. For example, better food choices and hygiene practices led to reduced malnutrition among the working class in the 1890s. City planning emerged as a critical aspect of public health. Businesses causing pollution, like slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants, were moved away from residential areas. In Chicago, Commissioner of Health Oscar Coleman DeWolf fought against the unhealthy conditions in the meatpacking industry, eventually leading to improvements in working and living conditions. Milk contamination was another major concern. In 1898, Dr. W. E. Bates noted that next to water supplies, milk was a primary source of typhoid fever infections. This happened when cows drank dirty water filled with germs, infecting both the milk and milkmen's diluted versions. To tackle these issues, various interventions were implemented. Higher cleanliness standards, better waste management, enhanced food inspections, improved child nutrition practices, and public health education emphasizing hygiene. Breastfeeding was encouraged to reduce infant mortality rates, as it offered protection against diseases like summer diarrhea compared to artificial formulas or cow's milk. Pasteurization of milk became standard practice, ensuring safety from harmful bacteria like those causing tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and diphtheria. Diphtheria, once feared, could be prevented through good hygiene and living conditions rather than vaccines or serums, according to Dr. James Gordon Cumming in 1922. As sanitation and hygiene advanced, working conditions improved too. Many women endured long hours in poor conditions for low wages in factories and shops before labor laws and unions emerged. Susan B. Anthony led the Working Women's Protective Association to fight for better treatment of women workers in sweated industries. Slowly, child labor laws were enacted. For instance, English laws limited children's work hours and prohibited underage employment in hazardous conditions like mines and factories. Although significant progress occurred by the 1900s, there was still room for improvement. Unsanitary pumps, contaminated milk supplies, unpaved streets, garbage dumping without covers, impure water sources, and sewage disposal into Lake Michigan remained issues in many cities. Despite these challenges, ongoing efforts by health officials, changing public opinions, technological advancements like filtered water supply and sewer systems, and various minor improvements gradually enhanced urban living conditions. In America, access to clean drinking water through centralized distribution systems led to a surge in personal hygiene practices. By 1910, more than 25% of urban residents enjoyed this luxury, compared to just 1.4% in 1890. Improved sanitation, technological innovations like electricity and refrigeration, and better transportation methods all contributed significantly to public health advancements. While medical treatments like antibiotics gained popularity, public health and hygiene had a more substantial impact on disease prevention and life expectancy improvements during this period. Yet, their contributions often took a backseat to medical interventions in popular belief. Chapter 11, The Amazing Decline. Suzanne Humphries, in her insightful exploration titled The Amazing Decline, unveils the often overlooked history surrounding diseases, vaccines, and the significant transformations that led to their diminishment. She begins by noting that, by the time laboratory medicine gained prominence, the groundwork for drastic improvements in public health had already been laid by humanitarians and social reformers of the 19th century. In the early 20th century, smallpox began to take a turn towards mildness. Once a terrifying disease that claimed lives ruthlessly, it mutated into a form with much lower fatality rates. From around 1897, the severe variant nearly vanished from the United States. Smallpox became so benign that it was often mistaken for other skin conditions, such as chickenpox or various types of itch. As smallpox cases became gentler and less lethal, vaccination rates naturally declined. Yet, remarkably, this didn't reverse the course of its decreased severity. Smallpox continued to weaken without needing the jab. This shift led medical professionals to fret that the disease might one day revert back to its original deadly form. The triumph over smallpox wasn't solely due to vaccination. Improvements in sanitation, nutrition, and overall living conditions played colossal roles too. Sanitary infrastructure, hygiene understanding, better nourishment, labor laws, scientific advancements, and other factors orchestrated a profound transformation in public health. Children once decimated by diarrhea and common infectious diseases now lived healthier lives as mortality rates plummeted dramatically over several decades. By the 1900s, what was once a world of squalor and suffering had morphed into the modern world we know today. Similar patterns were observed for other infectious diseases like typhoid fever. Once a formidable killer, its death rate plunged dramatically from 1228 per million living in England in 1838 to just 918 by 1848, and then further down to 306 for typhoid and 36 for typhus by 1878. The introduction of clean water supplies, sewage systems, and better living standards drastically reduced the impact of these diseases without relying on vaccines. Scarlet fever, a highly contagious bacterial disease causing severe symptoms, also diminished significantly. Its mortality rate dropped by 100% by mid-century. Despite the ongoing presence of the bacteria in schoolchildren, improved sanitation and living conditions altered human susceptibility to this ailment, rendering it a rare occurrence. Even diseases like whooping cough and measles witnessed an incredible decline in fatality rates. By the mid-1900s, their impact on mortality had almost vanished entirely, all before vaccines for these diseases were introduced. In fact, death rates from these illnesses had already plummeted by over 90% and 98%, respectively, prior to any vaccine rollouts. Diphtheria, another major concern in the past, saw its mortality rates drop by 92% before antibiotics were introduced in the late 1930s. Vaccines for diphtheria were later hailed as responsible for its demise, but historical data shows that the decline started before these vaccines came into use. Tuberculosis, a once deadly scourge, followed a similar trajectory, with mortality rates falling by 92% before the advent of antibiotics in the mid-1940s and reaching nearly 99% by 1970. Suzanne Humphries emphasizes that improvements in living standards, hygiene, nutrition, and overall healthcare infrastructure were the true heroes behind this dramatic disease decline. Vaccines may have played a role, but their impact was less substantial than commonly believed. She argues that modern medical practices often neglect these foundational improvements in favor of antibiotics, vaccinations, and surgical procedures, methods which can sometimes do more harm than good. Humphries calls for a broader perspective on health, one that prioritizes holistic well-being over germ-fighting tactics. This approach encourages an appreciation for the immune system's natural capabilities, proper nutrition, and appropriate vitamin supplements in supporting overall health, rather than relying solely on medical interventions to combat diseases. Chapter 12, The Disappearance of Polio. In her compelling exploration, Suzanne Humphries delves into the complex history surrounding polio and vaccines, unearthing a narrative often overlooked or deliberately obscured. She begins by introducing the perspective of Dr. Archie Callicorinos, an Australian doctor who worked with Aboriginal communities. These communities experienced robust health until European settlers arrived, suggesting that something in their lifestyle or environment had changed to introduce diseases like polio. Maurice Beale, editor of Capsule News Digest, even offered a $30,000 reward from 1954 to 1960 for proof that the polio vaccine wasn't harmful or fraudulent, a challenge left unanswered. Humphries then references the Salk and Sabin brothers, creators of live virus vaccines, who admitted these vaccines could cause the diseases they were meant to prevent, including polio and encephalitis. Humphries presents polio not as a monstrous virus, but rather as a label applied to various conditions. She discusses how polio was once diagnosed based on loose criteria, often leading to misdiagnoses. For instance, many cases previously attributed to polio were actually caused by other factors such as arsenic poisoning, congenital syphilis, or even the ingestion of DDT-treated produce. Before the vaccine era, polio wasn't the terrifying disease it was portrayed as. Humphries explains that many diseases once grouped under polio actually had different causes. She cites examples like Coxsackie and echoviruses, undiagnosed syphilis, arsenic and DDT toxicity, transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, and more. Humphries also highlights how diagnostic standards for polio changed post-vaccine introduction. Prior to 1954, any paralysis was considered polio. Afterward, only paralysis lasting over 60 days counted as polio, significantly altering reported statistics. She provides the example of a 1958 Michigan epidemic, where over half the cases weren't even caused by poliovirus. The author discusses how environmental factors and lifestyle changes contributed to increased susceptibility to paralysis in industrialized societies. These include diets high in refined sugars and flours, widespread use of antibiotics, DDT exposure, and tonsillectomies, all practices that could weaken the immune system and make people more vulnerable to polio-like symptoms. Humphries also touches on the role of medical advancements in shaping perceptions of polio. For instance, improvements in physical therapy led to better outcomes for paralysis victims, masking the initial causes of the disease. She mentions Sister Elizabeth Kenny's successful use of physical therapy and hot pack treatments, which were initially met with skepticism but eventually revolutionized polio care. Furthermore, she explores how the iron lung, once a symbol of polio's terror, is now replaced by ventilators, highlighting the evolution of medical technology in managing respiratory complications. Humphries critiques the focus on vaccines as the sole solution to polio, arguing that this narrow perspective overlooks other contributing factors. She emphasizes the need to consider environmental and dietary influences alongside viral causes. The author also raises concerns about modern misdiagnoses, noting conditions like transverse myelitis, which might once have been labeled as polio, are now recognized as distinct diseases with their own causes and treatments. She suggests that continued reliance on vaccination, without addressing underlying susceptibility factors, may not effectively prevent future outbreaks of similar paralytic conditions. In conclusion, Humphries' narrative weaves together medical history, environmental science, and social commentary, challenging readers to consider a broader view of polio and disease management. She encourages critical thinking about the role of vaccines and the importance of understanding diseases within their larger context. Chapter 13, Whooping Cough. Suzanne Humphries, a medical expert, delves into the history and impact of whooping cough vaccines. She begins by highlighting that whooping cough was once a severe disease for many children, but deaths had dropped dramatically by over 99% before vaccines became widely used. Humphries points out that doctors often fail to diagnose whooping cough accurately because its symptoms can be mild and hard to recognize. She notes that adults, not just children, can get whooping cough and experience similar symptoms. The medical community started developing a vaccine only after whooping cough deaths had already decreased significantly in the 1940s. Vaccination programs began in the late 1940s in the United States and 1957 in England. However, early signs of problems emerged soon after. Humphries shares stories of infants dying shortly after receiving their second dose of the diphtheria and pertussis vaccine, exhibiting symptoms like excessive crying, vomiting, and then becoming lifeless. She also mentions a 1948 report in Pediatrics discussing cases of brain damage following vaccination, noting that affected children were typically developing normally until the injection. As vaccine use expanded, more reports surfaced about serious consequences, including neurological damage and deaths. For example, a 1958 report detailed a case of mental retardation following vaccination. Despite these concerns, many medical experts continued to assert that severe side effects were rare. Humphries, however, argues that the risk might be higher than acknowledged. She cites a 1974 study suggesting an association between the vaccine and neurological illness, not just a coincidence. In 1977, Dr. Gordon Stewart proposed that vaccination wasn't justified because most whooping cough cases were mild, and children often recovered without vaccination. In 1981, he further stated that the risk from getting the vaccine was greater than contracting whooping cough itself. Humphries discusses a 1979 incident where 4 infants died within 24 hours of receiving a specific batch of the DTP vaccine. Despite tests indicating satisfactory results, this tragic event raised questions about vaccine safety. She also mentions a 1983 study reporting that reactions, like convulsions, occurred in approximately 1 in 1,750 vaccinations. Encephalopathy, a severe brain condition, was estimated to occur in 1 in 6,500 to 1 in 510,000 vaccinations. Humphries highlights that while most experts still believed severe reactions were rare, evidence mounted. A 1985 Institute of Medicine report estimated 7,197,840 minor reactions, 10,283 convulsions, 164 cases of encephalitis, and 58 cases of chronic disability annually due to the DTP vaccine. The panel also estimated 2 to 4 deaths per year from DTP. Despite these findings, many medical officials remained unconvinced about severe side effects. Humphries suggests that this bias might stem from a desire to maintain confidence in widely promoted medical procedures. She emphasizes that whooping cough vaccines didn't significantly impact mortality rates, since the disease's severity had diminished naturally before vaccine introduction. Vaccination may have only slightly reduced the number of cases, but official statistics often overestimate vaccine efficacy due to biased testing methods and medical community beliefs in vaccine protection. Humphries discusses how whooping cough cases were historically underdiagnosed because doctors didn't routinely consider the disease in older children and adults, leading to an underestimation of its prevalence. She argues that pertussis vaccines provide only short-term immunity, often lasting less than a decade, and don't prevent carriage or spread. This means vaccinated individuals can still transmit the disease. The medical professional notes that the concept of original antigenic sin, OAS, is crucial in understanding whooping cough vaccine limitations. OAS refers to how vaccines prime the immune system to respond in a specific way, potentially hindering future responses to different aspects of an infection. For pertussis, this means that vaccinated individuals may not effectively combat all bacterial toxins or strains due to their initial exposure being through the vaccine rather than natural infection. Humphries concludes by stating that whooping cough remains endemic in highly vaccinated populations, and vaccines can't eliminate it entirely. She asserts that the disease's true nature, often mild and unrecognized, has been distorted to promote vaccine uptake, creating unnecessary fear and misguided public health policies. Chapter 14, Measles. Suzanne Humphries delves into the history and impact of measles, vaccines, and their often overlooked aspects. In the 1930s, Dr. Aidan Cockburn observed high measles cases in England, but noted no fatalities among his patients. This was during the Depression era, when children's diets were poor and antibiotics weren't available. Humphries highlights a long-standing connection between vitamin A deficiency and severe measles outcomes, particularly in young children. She questions whether the medical community should consider administering vitamin A to children with measles complications and assessing their overall nutritional status. The author revisits historical data showing that measles epidemics occurred every 2 years in the US and England during the 1800s, with around 20% of children dying from the disease. Despite the fear surrounding measles, by the 1930s, its mortality rate dropped to 1–2%. Antibiotics didn't significantly influence this decline, as observed for other diseases like scarlet fever, typhoid, whooping cough, and diphtheria. Humphries presents graphs illustrating the steep drop in measles mortality rates from peak levels in England and the US by the 1960s, with England's decline reaching nearly 99.96% before vaccine introduction in 1968. She points out that the fear of measles lessened due to improved general nutrition in European children, reducing its impact. She discusses the 1963 introduction of the measles vaccine and how Massachusetts achieved a zero mortality rate for the disease that same year. Meanwhile, Washington state's rate was steadily approaching zero. In 1963, New England states reported minimal measles deaths compared to more common causes like asthma, accidents, motor vehicle accidents, and heart disease. Humphries shares early concerns about the measles vaccine. The initial aluminum-precipitated, formaldehyde-inactivated monkey kidney cell culture-based vaccine caused pneumonia and encephalopathy. Killed vaccines were ineffective, leading to rapidly declining immunity and the need for revaccination with live viruses. However, this resulted in atypical measles cases characterized by severe symptoms, including a distinct rash and pneumonitis. The author notes that despite vaccine advancements, issues persist. Measles strain RNA has been found in the bowels of children with autoimmune hepatitis, suggesting long-term virus persistence. Humphries also touches on original antigenic sin, where prior exposure or vaccination influences future immune responses, potentially exacerbating disease severity. She explores the unintended consequences of mass vaccination campaigns, such as the 1976 swine flu vaccine that caused Guillain-Barré syndrome in over 200 people, including 11 fatalities. Despite this, the vaccine's connection to GBS is now recognized by the CDC and IOM. Humphries discusses aseptic meningitis, or non-bacterial meningitis, linked to Brazil's MMR vaccination campaign. She explains that brain disease detection becomes easier when vaccines are given over longer periods rather than in short pulse intervals. The author critiques vaccine safety, highlighting concerns about neurological damage linked to measles vaccines, though they've never contained mercury. She references the 1976 swine flu vaccine fiasco as an example of potential future vaccine failures due to synchronous administration within weeks. Humphries emphasizes that while vaccine-induced immunity wanes over time, natural measles infection likely provides lifelong protection. She raises questions about the effectiveness and necessity of multiple measles shots for young children, especially given atypical or rashless cases attributed to vaccines. Ultimately, Humphries presents a nuanced perspective on measles, vaccines, and their impacts, urging readers to consider the full story behind these medical interventions. Chapter 15. Starvation, Scurvy, and Vitamin C. In the days gone by, people faced more than just infectious diseases like smallpox and measles. They also struggled with severe malnutrition due to food scarcity and periodic famines. This lack of proper nutrition often led to vitamin deficiencies, including scurvy. A disease caused by insufficient intake of vitamin C. Scurvy is a nasty condition resulting from not getting enough vitamin C in your diet. It wreaks havoc on the body because this vitamin is crucial for making healthy collagen, which holds our skin, bones, and blood vessels together. Without enough collagen, the body's structure starts to fall apart. In the olden days, scurvy was common among explorers and sailors who ate only meat, fat, coffee, and alcohol on long voyages or harsh expeditions. Their diets lacked fresh fruits and veggies that naturally contain vitamin C. As a result, many suffered from this terrible disease, which caused symptoms like weakness, tender gums, loose teeth, swollen legs, dark skin discoloration, and eventually, death. A famous explorer, Captain James Cook, lost several crew members to scurvy during his voyages. Eventually, he realized that eating lime or lemon juice prevented the disease. Limes became known as limes prevent scurvy, leading to the saying, "A sailor's delight is a slice of Sussex light." Vitamin C has another vital role. It protects our cells from damage caused by harmful chemicals called free radicals. This protection happens in tiny cell structures called mitochondria, which generate energy for the body. When vitamin C levels are low, mitochondria become damaged, leading to a whole body shutdown and severe fatigue. Without enough energy, essential bodily functions falter, resulting in muscle weakness, cardiac problems, neurological disorders, and eventually, death. As we learned more about nutrition, the number of scurvy cases dropped dramatically. People started eating healthier diets with fruits and veggies rich in vitamin C, like oranges, strawberries, bell peppers, and broccoli. This change prevented many cases of scurvy and improved overall health. Nowadays, we know that vitamin C is essential not just for avoiding scurvy, but also for a strong immune system, healthy bones, and even protection against some bacteria and viruses. Despite this, the forgotten history of nutrition's role in disease prevention still influences modern medical practices today. Suzanne Humphries explains that many doctors overlooked the power of proper nutrition when treating diseases like measles, scarlet fever, and even polio. They focused more on vaccines and antibiotics, forgetting how diet can make a significant difference in managing health conditions. For instance, during the U.S. Civil War, many soldiers died from extreme nutritional deficiencies or easily preventable diseases like scurvy rather than battle injuries. Similarly, in Soviet Russia's famine from 1919 to 1923, cannibalism became commonplace as people starved. Humphries highlights how doctors like Fred Klenner discovered the benefits of vitamin C in treating various conditions and diseases, such as herpes zoster, shingles, and measles. He found that massive doses could quickly reduce symptoms and boost the immune system's response to viral infections. Sadly, these breakthroughs were often dismissed or forgotten by mainstream medicine, which leaned heavily on vaccines and antibiotics instead. The result is that many people are unaware of how powerful nutrition can be in preventing and managing diseases. By learning about this forgotten history, we can better understand the value of a balanced diet and its impact on our health. Chapter 16. Lost Remedies. In the field of medicine, many flawed ideas have gained public support and legitimacy over time. This phenomenon is often driven by belief momentum rather than solid scientific evidence. Suzanne Humphries, a medical expert, illustrates this point with several historical examples. One such example involves smallpox prevention. While vaccination was widely accepted as the primary defense against smallpox, alternative methods were largely ignored despite their effectiveness and safety. For instance, pure cider vinegar was suggested by J.P. Maclean, Ph.D., in 1901 to prevent smallpox by taking 2 or 3 tablespoonsful multiple times a day. Humphries also highlights the use of herbs like cinnamon and garlic as powerful disease fighters. Cinnamon has antibacterial properties, as shown by a 2009 study published in the Journal of Craniomaxillofacial Surgery. Historical records indicate its efficacy against cholera and diphtheria. A 1878 letter to the Lancet reported that all cholera cases survived when treated with cinnamon. Similarly, in 1889, Dr. Nags used a mixture including cinnamon, resulting in full recovery for 75 diphtheria patients. Cinnamon was also found beneficial by Dr. C.G. Grant in 1899 for treating malaria, intestinal problems, typhoid, and influenza. Garlic, another herb, has long been used to ward off sickness. Its effectiveness against smallpox was noted in a 1903 article. Dr. A.P. Seligman observed that onion-eating populations were immune to smallpox, suggesting garlic's protective properties. In 1902, Dr. Minchin reported successful treatment of tuberculosis with garlic. Modern science now confirms its antibacterial qualities, including against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA. Echinacea, or purple coneflower, is another herb Humphries discusses. It strengthens the immune system and was found effective in treating smallpox. Dr. Joseph Adolphus reported in 1901 that echinacea modified smallpox severity, restrained suppuration, checked symptoms, promoted recovery, and improved convalescence. It also showed promise in treating blood poisoning and anthrax, and alleviated burn pain instantly. Jicama, a sweet root vegetable native to Mexico and Central South America, was used by General Rivera of the Mexican Army in 1890s to cure typhus fever with impressive results. All 4,000 treated patients recovered without any deaths. The vegetable's medicinal properties remain unknown as it hasn't been chemically analyzed. Fresh vegetable juices were also used therapeutically. In 1905, Dr. Russell successfully treated active tuberculosis with a combination of foods, especially vegetable juices. His protocol included fresh air, sunlight, good nutrition, exercise, sputum care, and vegetable juice consumption, leading to remarkable cures. Apple cider vinegar was suggested by Dr. Roth in 1877 as a smallpox prophylactic, with success reported in Atchison, Kansas. In 1901, Professor Maclean promoted its use for smallpox prevention and later found it effective against diphtheria too. Today, we know apple cider vinegar is a potent disinfectant and body alkalizer, supporting better disease resistance due to its potassium content and enzymes aiding digestion. Lastly, Humphries mentions cod liver oil, valued for maintaining a healthy immune system, especially in treating tuberculosis. Its high fat content makes it both a food source and drug in convalescence following lung or bronchial inflammations. These examples underscore how numerous disease-fighting remedies were overlooked or dismissed in favor of vaccines and other mainstream treatments, despite their proven effectiveness. This forgotten history highlights the importance of questioning medical norms and considering diverse approaches to health and healing. Chapter 17, Belief and Fear. Suzanne Humphries, a medical professional with a focus on historical perspectives, delves into the topic of diseases, vaccines, and their often overlooked past. She starts by noting how fear and belief have significantly influenced our perceptions of health and well-being. People frequently feel safer when they trust larger entities like governments or big institutions, believing these can protect them better due to their size and perceived knowledge. This mindset extends even to doctors, who often rely on established medical practices rather than their independent judgment. For instance, the view of the human body as a flawed vessel in need of medical intervention, surgery, antibiotics, or other treatments has become commonplace in modern medicine. Humphries then explores the history of vaccinations, highlighting how information can be manipulated to fit certain narratives. She references Dr. Charles Creighton's comprehensive 1898 report on vaccination, which later had its tables removed from the Encyclopedia Britannica and was replaced with a more favorable account of vaccines. This change illustrates how historical records can be altered to promote specific beliefs, in this case, the effectiveness of vaccinations. The author also discusses the phenomenon of perceived disease risk, increasing after the introduction of vaccines. For example, measles and chickenpox, once considered normal childhood illnesses, became feared when vaccines for them were developed. This shift led many to willingly surrender their decision-making power to medical authorities, fearing potential complications from diseases. Humphries critiques the narrative that opposition to vaccines stems only from uninformed individuals. She points out that Dr. Paul Offit's claim about a surge in smallpox cases and deaths in England after vaccine usage declined lacks supporting evidence. Similarly, she debunks the notion that pertussis, whooping cough, vaccination significantly reduced deaths from the disease, citing data showing death rates had been dropping for decades before the vaccine's introduction. The author further discusses how historical facts often contradict popular beliefs about vaccines. For instance, despite high vaccination rates in England and Wales during the 1800s, smallpox epidemics still occurred, disproving the idea that vaccines were essential for controlling the disease. Humphries emphasizes that many of our current beliefs about vaccines are based on exaggerated benefits and concealed problems. She underscores the importance of questioning such narratives and examining the real evidence behind them, rather than simply accepting them as truths. This includes understanding that many diseases once thought to be caused by germs are now known to have other causes, like nutritional deficiencies. In conclusion, Humphries encourages critical thinking regarding vaccines and diseases. She stresses that our historical understanding of these topics may not align with current beliefs, and that it's crucial to reassess these narratives using available evidence. This way, individuals can make informed decisions about their health without being swayed solely by fear or blind faith in medical authorities. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.